Okay, lovely people. So we've looked at the opening, and I know sometimes because we're slowing this process down, obviously you'd make those quick decisions in the exam really quickly. Visual, using your eye to look at the visual graphics. Okay, BBC Worklife. Okay, it's a online website, affordances, constraints. These will be decisions and knowledge that you have. That means you make these decisions very quickly in the exam. We're really slowing it down. So the truth is, we're not going to look at the whole article today. We're just now going to look at the opening, um, taking ourselves with a bit, like I said, the guided reading, looking at some points together, doing some responses, and then we'll come and look at another part of the article tomorrow, etc. across the week. Okay, so let's have a look then. Now, on your version of the article, if you're looking at the PDF version or the Word version, this is what we call our stand first. So we've got some very traditional kind of like article features being employed here by our writer. We've had our title, okay, or our headline if we were looking at a traditional article. And now we've been introduced to the stand first. Does exactly what it says on the tin, yeah? It's the standalone first paragraph. It's often cohesively linked to the headline. And it just will maybe stand out from the rest of the article. It might be in bold, a slightly larger font. Okay, now I'm going to read you the stand first, and I'm going to look at the activities around it. Okay, so let's just zoom in on the middle of the screen. So some of us will speak with a posher voice if we think it will make the right impression, but is it worth it? Accents are more than just about how we speak, writes Chilu. Okay, guys, so we've got green, blue, and grey. Now, what I've tried to do is colour code it. So the green tends to be language labelling. Yeah, so language level work. So it might be picking out a word class as we move through the slides. It might be thinking about how the writer's using language. Blue is that AO3, checking that we understand what we're reading, what it might mean, what representations might be being created. And grey is a little bit of something we can borrow, something that we can learn, that we can use elsewhere. Okay, so that's the kind of code I've tried to go for. So hopefully it's going to be consistent as we work through. Okay, so just all your answers are right in front of you. Okay, so I'm going to read through, you're going to pause, come up with your answers. Okay, so in the opening interrogative, okay, so you can see where our interrogative ends. There's our question mark. Pick out the modal. Okay, so there's a little bit of a warm up, just seeing what we remember. Pick out the modal. Pick out the subordinating conjunction or connective, depending on which word you prefer to use. Pick out the coordinating conjunction that creates a compound complex sentence. And pick out the adjective that links to the social factor of class. So they're your green tasks, they're your language level tasks. So in a minute, you're going to pause it and do those answers. Okay, down here in the blue section, so checking that you're understanding what you're reading. The idea of making the right impression implies that some people change the way they speak in order to. So I'm just asking for you there to think about, what does that phrase mean, the right impression? Okay, and then here's your challenge. This links to the ideas of Labov because he found that. Okay, so I did say this is going to be about using your knowledge from last week as well. So how could you complete that idea? Okay, so checking what you've read and what you understand. Now, okay, a little bit in the grey over here. A reminder, so I've mentioned headline, stand first. There's also the byline. Now, this is in grey because we could use this to remind us when we write our journalistic responses, our own articles in the future, what we might need to do. So it just says here, what's the name of the journalist? Okay, so press pause and find that information. Okay, darlings, I'm going to go through the answers quite quickly initially. Okay, so just mark yourself as right. So in the opening interrogative, so I'm already embedding that terminology from our opening. So we've got two interrogatives. The headline is an interrogative, and she's also using an interrogative within this stand first. So in the opening interrogative, pick out the modal. Always remember modals: coulda, woulda, shoulda, last word of the fool. I always remember that lyric from the song. So it's that modal will. Okay, now if we just quickly zoom in on that, will speak. So modals are used to define, refine the meaning of a verb. Okay, so in this case, actually the main verb there is speak, but will speak, that modal immediately creates a degree of certainty. So some of us will speak versus some of us may speak, could speak, should speak. Will creates a tone of certainty. So if you've got the modal will, brilliant. Okay, if you need a quick recap, don't be afraid to use these lessons to go back to your notes to revise. Will, should, could, ought. There's a bank of modals available to us. Now, modals are really good. They get you at least a B grade on the mark scheme. There's only a limited number, a finite number of modals, so you can just learn them off by heart. And you can often link them into something quite interesting about meaning, degrees of certainty, the certainty with which a writer is presenting an idea or representing an issue. So some of us will speak, so there's that certainty of tone. Now, the subordinated conjunction or connective in this sentence. Okay, so our conjunctions, our connectives, these are words that link clauses and phrases within sentences. Okay, now with subordinated conjunctions, there's actually quite a big bank of these. But if you get used to recognizing your subordinate conjunctions, it's a brilliant way to build up to sentence types, okay? Because as soon as you see these conjunctions, you have to be looking at a complex or complex compound sentence. All right, my lovely. So what did you say it was? Brilliant. It's that if. See it over there? Some of us will speak with a posher voice if. So that if is immediately a hinge that's joining these two clauses together. Some of us will speak with a posher voice. Now, immediately, that if is creating a conditional relationship. There's a reason some of us will speak with a posher voice. So ifs are conditional. If we think it will make the right impression. Now, this is one of those sentences, they're out there, they're actually becoming more common, which we call the compound complex sentence, okay, or complex compound, that it's bringing together those two elements. And the reason I wanted to draw attention to this is sometimes if we'd looked at conjunctions and you'd lighted on the word but and ignored the if, you might have tried to have labeled this as a compound sentence. And that would have got you, it doesn't have marks taken off, but you would get no credit for that because it would be a wrong label. Okay, so and that but, and we're training our eyes to spot conjunctions, and we often spot our and, buts, ors, and so. So there is a finite number of coordinating conjunctions that are really quick to remember. And, but, or, so. However, if we only see those words and then immediately assume we're looking at compound sentences, we can fall into a dangerous trap. Okay, so always double check two things. Number one, are there any other types of conjunctions within the sentence I'm looking at? So if I spotted my but and I see if immediately trumps that but. Okay? If immediately upgrades this to a complex relationship, a complex set of ideas, not a compound set of ideas. Okay? So we double check, are there any other conjunctions? Now, sometimes, and again, this is one of those tricky relationships between how we speak and how we write. Because sometimes now we see, particularly journalists, using compound conjunctions like but or and at the beginning of a sentence that is really simple. But I don't care. Now, in that instance, it is a coordinating conjunction, but it's being used in a non-standard way for an emphatic kind of emphasis, really. But it's enough. But really, when you look at the makeup of that sentence, there's only one verb structure. So actually, although you've got the coordinating conjunction, it's being used in a non-standard way for emphasis, and really it's a simple sentence. So guys, we know language is never simple, it's always complex. So what we want is to practice putting our thoughts through like a little mental checklist of ideas. Tick, 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 tick. Okay, so we've got the coordinated conjunction but. Brilliant. Now, which is the adjective in this opening interrogative? Remember, we've not gone past the question mark yet. That links to the social factor of class. So this is really reminding us that there's one thing just to spot and to label, but if you can label the language features that enable us to talk about how social factors determine a person's use of language, that's judicious. That's making the right choice. Okay, lovely people. So which is the adjective? Okay, the describing word that links to the social factor of class. Brilliant. You're absolutely right. Yeah, there it is. It's another comparative. So it's ending in ER. So like we saw before, smarter. We've now got it linked to a second comparative adjective, posher. Some of us will speak with a posher voice if we think that will make the right impression. Okay, so a conditional relationship. We're going to speak posh. We're going to change the way we speak if we want to make a right impression. So this conditional relationship between how we're using language and the social factors at play. So in a certain social situation, this implies if I want to make a good impression, I am going to use a posher voice. Now look at that lovely coordinating conjunction but there. But is it worth it? And that again takes us back to the fact that our writer, Chi Lu, is questioning okay, what's going on, the way people have different attitudes or certain attitudes towards language, and whether it's worth it. Okay, is it worth speaking with a posh voice? Is it worth changing the way you speak to create a particular impression? And that's the tension, the debate being set up within this article. And then we've got a lovely response to that question. So we immediately go into this declarative. I know it wasn't one that I asked you to look at, which says accents are more than just about how we speak. Writes Chilu. Okay, so the byline, what's the name of our journalist? Brilliant, Chilu. And let's look at this final idea then of making the right impression. Okay, so when we talk about making the right impression, it's a noun phrase. Okay, so we've got the, so there's our determiner, right, our adjective, impression. So we've got the word right, modifying the idea of impression. What do we think that means? Okay, brilliant, brilliant. Yep, so the idea of making the right impression, the idea of pleasing people, the idea that we want to please people, that we want other people to view us a particular way, that the impression we create, the way we impress on others is going to be favorable, is going to be making the right impression, making a good impression, having people think well of us. Now, although it's not here, it just reminds me actually when we're looking at social factors, the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic drives. So this implies that there's an intrinsic desire to please people, but sometimes that can be good, sometimes it can be a bit bad, isn't it? You know, if I'm changing the way I look because my friend tells me that's the way I should look, but really I'm not comfortable with those changes, I'm giving into an extrinsic and external pressure that's greater than my own. So there's always this tension between things I do because I want to, because I'm making an intrinsic decision, an internal positive decision or decision for myself, versus the pressure that comes from outside of me. Okay, so right impressions, this idea then that we change the way we speak in order to impress or please others. So it's a little ad here. This links to the ideas of Labov because he found that. So how can we link this to Labov? What did Labov find out that strengthens or correlates or adds to the focus of this article at the beginning? Brilliant. So Labov recognized that workers, so people in the workplace, particularly in high-end stores, were trying to speak with a posher voice to impress their clients, to make it sound like they fitted in with the people that they were serving. So that reminds us of Labov's experiment, the New York department experiment, where he was looking at the way people were changing their accents in the higher end stores, the way that they were pronouncing fourth floor, in order to impress their clients, the shoppers that were coming into the store. So both Labov in the 1960s and now this article are suggesting that this pressure still exists, that there is still a pressure put on people to adapt the way they speak, to speak with a posher voice in order to make a particular impression. And this article goes on to explore this tension, the reasons for this in detail. Now, we are just going to pause here. Okay, we're going to look through this article, the next bit of the article, the opening, and then apply these questions. So they say you should always dress for excess, but should that extend the way you speak? We're not adverse to dressing appropriately to making a good impression at work or for a social engagement, even if it means wearing clothes we wouldn't normally choose to put on. Is changing your accent to get ahead any different? There are some famous names who've done it. Margaret Thatcher swapped her Lincolnshire accent for a posher one, adopting the standard received pronunciation, or RP, which at the time was thought to be more in keeping with a position of political power. More recently, Tony Blair and George Osborne took their own accents in the opposite direction, introducing more working-class Mockney inflections in their upper-class speech in an attempt to enhance their perceived approachability. With such obvious changes to their accents, they were roundly mocked for lacking authenticity. Right, guys, I'm going to ask you to pause here and work through these tasks. Now, we're going to use these tasks at the start of tomorrow's lesson as our beginning. So take as much time as you need. Answer these questions. All the answers as they say are on the page in front of you. So which three MPs are cited as examples of accent changing? Which MP is an example of upward convergence? Which is an example of downward convergence? Which verb phrase shows a negative reaction to the public to these changes? Last task over here, tracking the metaphor. So the opening introduces the idea of dressing for success. Can you find three other words and phrases that extend this metaphor, that keep it going? So guys, thanks for working with me today. Just pause that now and we'll go through those answers at the beginning of tomorrow's lesson. Thanks, guys.